Okay, Professor.
By the way, anybody has any questions? Just wanted to make sure once. No. Okay, good. Yeah, Abhijit.
So in continuation with the previous lecture, in last lecture, I'll just quickly recap. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay. So hello.
Yes, Abhijit, we can see your screen. We see the targeted versus untargeted attacks.
Oh, okay, cool. So in last session, we broadly looked at the motivation for robustness of AI. So in this session, we'll be mostly looking at the targets. We'll be looking at the attacks, and in reality, there can be many attacks that can be done to a model. But today we'll be broadly looking at the most famous and the most structured ones, and these are the ones that were used a lot for adversarial training. Essentially, our goal is not just adversarial training, but a certified defense. The difference is in adversarial training, what you do is like you plan an attack, then take the worst case scenario, like what would happen if I attack a system, and then you minimize the loss, like we saw in the last session. But in certified defense, you don't even look at the attack. You work with some abstract symbolic regions, like we have discussed in last session, and we work with and we work with that symbolic regions. But I think understanding attacks, some of the attacks will give us a good idea about how these manipulations are done in neural networks. So to start with, I think there are two broad categories of attacks, and it is quite evident from the name itself, like the targeted attack and untargeted attack. So in targeted attack, we aim to misclassify the input to a specific label, like for example, panda to gibbon that we have seen in the last session. We add a noise which is not random, that is carefully designed, and we classify it to some other specific label that we want to classify to. And the other one is the untargeted attack, in which we want to just misclassify the input. It doesn't matter to what target label we want to classify to, we will just misclassify the input by adding some perturbation. And the reason for introducing these two categories is that these two categories are slightly different optimization problem, in the sense that in targeted attack, what essentially you want to do is actually you want your model to move towards the target label from the current label. So essentially you want to minimize the loss of your model with respect to the target label. So targeted attack is a minimization problem, whereas in untargeted attack, you want to like just move away from the current label. So that if I talk in terms of the loss, if you have some current loss with respect to the current correct label, when you just want to move away from that label, you just want to maximize the loss. So that is why this untargeted attack is a maximization problem. Otherwise, these all attacks are based on the same structure. So I don't think they vary a lot. But now let's look at more formal definition. So this is how we define a problem statement for a targeted attack. Uh, Suppose F is a neural network model and X is a range of inputs, and C is the set of classes. Like maybe if it's a classification task, then C will have the set of classes. And for an input, X belongs to our input region. And there is a target label that we want our model to get classified to, which is not the correct label. So for like, let's assume that we have a model which is working perfectly. We have already trained it, and it is classifying it to the correct class. Now what we want to do is like attack the model and make it move towards a target class T, which will be a wrong label. And how we are going to do that? By adding a perturbation. So essentially we will be adding some perturbation to the input, and initially, since it was pointing to the correct class, after adding the perturbation, it will point to the target class. So this is how we will define a targeted attack. Whereas in untargeted attack, everything remains same except the fact that I don't have to deal with target class. I just want that whatever perturbation I add to my model, to my input, the model has to like classify it to some other class as compared to one to which it was earlier pointing to. So this is how we will define an untargeted attack. So yeah, before jumping into the attacks, let's even discuss how are these attacks classified in terms of white box attacks and black box attacks. Although we have discussed some part of it in the last lecture, let's make it more concrete with this definition that in white box attack, the attacker knows the model as well as the parameters and the architecture, which means that he has the idea of the complete model. Whereas in black box attack, the attacker may know the architecture, but not its parameters. And this is why it has become so important that we know that even black box attack is possible. So even if the attacker knows the architecture, it may be risky. And that is why like the security and protecting our neural network architecture is really important. And there is a one very important result that people have found it experimentally, that these adversarial examples are transferable. By this, what I mean is that suppose the attacker uh, doesn't have the knowledge of the parameters of the model, but he knows the architecture, and somehow he also have access to the inputs. So for example, maybe if it's autonomous driving, then the inputs will be the environment. And I don't think it's very difficult to have the knowledge of input in that scenario. And somehow even the attacker knows the architecture. So what attacker can do is that he can train his own model with that input and the architecture. And for obvious reasons, the weight won't be same. But if he trains the model on that input and he performs a attack on that model, and if he's successful in doing that attack, then he will likely succeed on attacking the original system. To put it in more concrete terms, why this is happening is that suppose we have an original model and that model is fully trained, and then attacker trains its own model with the input. Even though we know that the weights won't be same because there are many hyperparameters that is involved in the training, but still the performance of the model will be similar because we know that the neural networks have local minimums. So it might have happened that the original model might have settled at one of the local minimums, and the attacker might have settled the model in a separate local minimum. But essentially, the performance of both these models will somehow be the same. It won't be exactly same for obvious reasons because these are not the same local minimum, but they have a lot of characteristics in common. And that is why it has been experimentally found that if we are able to attack one of the systems, then most probably we will be able to attack the second system also. And that is why if we will be looking at white box attacks, because we now know that even if it's a black box scenario, if the attacker has knowledge of the environment, he can easily attack in a similar way like how we will be doing in the white box attacks. So now let's look at the attacks, and the most uh, famous one and the most traditional method is the fast gradient sign method. And this is not a very efficient method, but then I think the PGD attack, which we'll be discussing later, is based upon this method. So essentially what we do, and for obvious reasons, this FGSM also like we categorize it into two types, that is targeted and untargeted. So let us first look at the targeted one. So like let us first define like a perturbation. So this perturbation is what we'll be adding to the input. So as I have explained earlier that we are more interested in moving our model towards the target class. So what essentially we'll be doing is we'll provide the input and then calculate the loss with respect to the target label T. And once we get the loss, we'll try to find the gradient with respect to the input. And then we will have this gradient vector and we'll take a signum function over that vector. and we'll multiply it by a small constant, epsilon. And this epsilon forms the bound of the perturbation. So essentially what we're trying to do is, suppose if I have a x here, sorry, I am not able to control the mouse properly, but suppose I have x here, I'll form a box kind of scenario around it. And this box has a length 2 times epsilon, where this is the epsilon. And I'll try to like add this perturbation and try to find out this perturbation. And one thing to note here is that even if my loss with respect to some of the pixel is very small, maybe 0.001, even then the signum function will turn the overall vector to 1. So even if it's too small, so that is why, like, I think sometimes this FGSM method perturbs the input a lot, because even if my loss is very less for some of the pixels, since we're taking a signum function, it will like show 1 for everything. And essentially, since I have explained, like, we'll be minimizing the loss with respect to function t. So with respect to target label t. So essentially what we'll be doing is, once we find the gradient, we will move against the direction of gradient. And that is why we have a minus sign here. So we'll be subtracting our perturbation from the input label. And once we have our new pixels, we'll just, I'm talking in terms of pixels because I think it's easy to imagine in terms of images, but then these attacks can be applied to anything, like maybe audio signals or maybe other problems also. So, so once we get our new pixel, we'll then check it that if that new pixel is an adversarial example, that is, our model is classifying that input to a target class T. And traditionally, these FGSMs are designed to be a one-step problem. That is, I'll calculate my eta and then do one update and then check it. So we can do multiple iterations for, obviously, and this is what a PGD do, that is projected gradient descent. And in addition to the iterations that we are doing in PGD, we will do some projections. So all this we will be discussing in future. But what I want to say that this PGD attack is based on this FGSM method. And also one thing to note here is that when we are doing FGSM method, we will be always at the boundary of the bounds that we are having due to the epsilon, because the signum function is plus or minus 1 or 0. So if it's plus 1, then we'll be here. If it's minus 1, then we'll be here. So this is how the FGSMs work. And this epsilon is a very small value. So as traditionally it was designed to be a one-step problem. So that is why FGSM is not optimal, but then it is designed to be fast, because somehow the attacker wants to make an attack, you just quickly do these calculations, add the perturbation, and if it's successful, well and good. If not, then move on. So that is why this attack is not very useful. But then, yeah, these were the most traditional ones. And
No.
similarly, we have.
Sorry, I have
Yeah.
one question.
Yeah, please.
So this will always be fixed, right? It will be plus eta or minus eta. So what is learned here using the gradients?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sorry.
So what I was asking is, as per this equation, the value will be always like plus eta, plus epsilon or minus epsilon, right? And the epsilon is already fixed. So what
Right.
actually is learned here using the gradients?
Yes.
Because this will always be like, if I fix my eta to 0.007, it will always be x minus 0.007 or x plus 0.07. So where the actual update of parameter is happening or something.
Right. Yeah, even I had this question, like, why are we taking the signum function here? Why can't we just move in the direction, like normalized direction of this gradient? That would be more appropriate because we are capturing the exact direction. But then the thing is, this gradient gives the sense of the movement, and the signum captures a fair bit of that. So maybe I have function like 0.3, 0.7, 0.3, then the exact direction is this, but then our signum captures 1 and 1. And when I tried like removing the signum and just using the there the code is available online, and when you try to like implement your attack without using the signum, like directly I used to perturb in the direction of the gradient, and I normalized the direction of gradient, and the attack was not successful. I don't know why, I couldn't find the reason, but then maybe the signum gives a more harsh direction for the moment. I think I'm not sure about this reason, but
Can I
then
jump for a second?
yes,
I think the reason for the signum is to make sure that you perturb the noise so that you add the noise, the perturbation to your image. So if you look at the signum function, sine of g is 1 when the loss is greater than 0, right? So what if you calculate your loss, delta x of loss t, and it's negative? Then because it's now negative and you have to add the perturbation, you now have to add a minus sign in front of it so that x minus eta becomes a positive entity, right? So that you are adding to x, not negating from it. Does that make sense? I think that's the reason. So if your loss is now positive, and you do, if your loss is positive, then x minus eta becomes positive as well, so that you don't take away too much from it.
Yeah, actually the signum function is not like taking away the negative sign, but it's kind of working in more or less the magnitude way. We are just like saturating it to 1, even if it's positive, like 0.001, the signum function will make it 1. We are just increasing the magnitude in the direction of gradient.
It's positive or negative?
So if it's negative, like minus 0.001, then it will saturate it to -1. So I think the direction is not changing with signum, but the magnitude with which you perturb, because what is happening when I ran the code, what happened was when I was using just gradient, maybe the loss is so less with respect to some pixels that the perturbations were not enough to do the attack. They were very small. So that is why maybe signum gives a more harsher magnitude for the attack.
I think this is something, if you people have read about perceptron training algorithm. So it tries to find the sign and change its parameter according to that. So this is similar to that. But coming back to my question, so the assumption is that we know the model, right? We want to figure out how much do you want to perturb, right? That's our task here. So that we can change the prediction of the model. Okay. So I'm still trying to understand that we already have a model. It already predicts something with respect to its input, right? Now our task is that we need to find an eta such that if we add eta to our existing input, the prediction of that particular model changes to some other class, right? And if that class is fixed, we call it a targeted attack. Okay. So the task basically here is to learn what should we add to the input, right? That's the task here.
Right.
Okay. So I still don't understand from this figure, like how is eta updated here, because I still am getting stuck. It will have only two values, epsilon or minus epsilon. So you would have directly taken those two values and you would have found out and the outplay, and you would not be successful if I say that, because we are not sure how only two values would work. So
I'm
you
still
mean
trying
like
to understand
add...
what exactly is happening here.
So you mean like to every pixel, I'll be adding eta, something like that, or?
Yeah, so what he's saying is, Abhijit, Maulik's point is, you see, what you're to be, if you look at the whole expression, the signum function basically gives you an output of -1, 0, or 1, right?
Right.
Okay, so now, so basically, this part of your function basically either gives you 1, -1, or 0, right?
Right.
Okay, now once you have decided what your epsilon would be, so the output, your neta, will either be equal to minus epsilon or plus epsilon, right?
Right. Right.
Or 0 maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so basically what he's saying is you are either going to remove epsilon or or add epsilon value, or just leave it as it is, and that's what your perturbation is going to be.
Right. Right.
Okay, now what he's trying to ask is, what is the whole notion? Okay, if you're deciding on what is that additional that you're bringing in to your epsilon that is actually causing that changes. And I think what so Maulik, the only thing in this case is happening is epsilon and plus epsilon or minus epsilon is the scale by which you want to change. You don't, and see, in these adversarial attacks, basically you don't want to change it by an amount that is large, so that is the image, it's apparent on the image. You don't want that to be very apparent on the image. You want it to be minimal on the image so that it's not apparent to a normal human eye. Now the question is, in what direction should you change that epsilon? And that is all I think they're trying to get here from that. The signum function is basically telling you, okay, try changing in this direction by whatever amount you have decided as an hyperparameter epsilon, and see if the thing changes. And they're trying to do it in parallel for all the possible pixels.
Right. So this is like something like this, if this helps.
Yeah, so for example, here you see, right? So basically what it's saying is, okay, here's my point X, and I have to make a change. Now, which direction should I change? Either this direction or this direction or this direction, right? So I can make a change in this direction, or this direction. Now, which direction should I make a change is basically determined by your loss value. And whatever that value comes out to be, you make a change in that direction only by a step that you've decided. So your step is basically epsilon, whatever that epsilon you choose.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
This targeted FGS method, is it iterative or is just one time?
It's a one-step method.
One-step method, okay. So we basically, we are just by applying this sign function, we are deciding for, we are going to which direction, right?
That's it. So basically, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was saying that if it's a one-step method, so we after each optimization, we only staying in a circle size of with a geometry of epsilon, right?
Yeah.
So how can we guarantee that this will this will lead us to the targeted class?
No, so exactly, you're absolutely right. There's no guarantee. The guarantee that it says is that it will stay within that hyperbox of x plus epsilon and x minus epsilon, but there's no guarantee that you will get an attack by this method. There's no guarantee. What they're saying is it's highly likely that you might get an attack, because what has been seen is, in general, in adversarial attacks, is that if you change a few pixels in certain way, you get an attack. And that's what they're trying to do it by changing only in one-step method. If I change some pixel values in a certain direction by a certain value, do I get an attack? That is it. But it's not a guaranteed attack. There's no guarantee that you will get an attack, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's why people, you keep trying. If you get an attack, excellent. If you don't, you move on.
Yeah.
And that's why it's one of the earlier, I would say, nascent stages of when people were designing these adversarial attacks. They came up with this, but as I think Abhijit will mention later, that there are more variants of that are more concrete and focused attack that will actually happen.
Yes. And I think whichever attacks I'll be discussing today, like I think we can't give guarantee to any of the attack because there is no guarantee that the
Yeah.
attack will be 100% successful.
Yeah, attacks are
So-
never guaranteed, right? It's
Yeah,
think of it as an adversary. You are trying your best, but there's no guarantee that you will certainly be able to attack the model. And that's why the whole other theme of research is adversarial defenses, that you are trying to make your model that is robust against any kind of these attacks.
I have a
Yes.
short question. So this kind of thing will only work for images, right? Because only there, like, we change
It's like pixels. The image looks pretty much same. But in suppose if something is a text kind of thing,
Right.
then if we change the input, everything changes, right? Because if it's like indexing kind of thing.
It's not necessarily, Maulik. I think you can still apply in different domains. For example, a lot of these attacks have been tried on, let's say, audio signals. And I'm just thinking out of my you should be able to try on your text as well. It's just a change of few, let's say you make a spelling mistake, and I'm not sure, but I'm just trying to think, and that might just cause your classifier to make a different prediction in, let's say, the emotion detection part or whatever, sentiment analysis thing. I don't know, but I think it should be generic. Why do you think it will not be applicable to NLP?
I think due to the discrete nature of that, right? Because if you see the audio signals that are sorry, I'm getting the call. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Maybe. Yeah. Let's see, and we can discuss.
So what I was saying is, if you see an image, that is like a continuous kind of thing, right? So
Yeah.
if you perturb that slightly, everything remains same. Even in audio signal, if you take it as a mathematical signal, if you add some perturbation, it will just move around like that.
Right.
But
Right.
representing text is a different base, right?
You are right.
We don't know how to do that.
I see your point there. Yeah, is because there's a lot of discrete nature in your text, basically, and how you model it, basically how you design your data. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Let's see.
So what I was saying is that pixel value 1 has some interpretation. 1 plus 0.1 is 1.1. Suppose perturbation is 0.1. So 1.1 also has some pixel interpretation. But in text, we know that 1 is some word plus, but 1.1 is not a word or something.
Yeah.
It's an invalid input kind of thing.
I agree with you. So there's no question of having a 1.1 in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I see your point. So yeah, let's see. But very good point.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
I just wanted to comment that I have seen attacks on NLP before, and it's exactly what Apurva was saying. Just some spelling mistakes can change, like, for example, how you would classify a comment as positive or negative. Just spelling a single word wrong could completely change your prediction.
Yeah, and if I want to add something to this application of these attacks in NLP, it's just basically what I was found helpful in understanding these kind of attacks is that we are trying to move the like this is a like there is a theory, manifold theory. So if we are deciding we are deciding to move the decision boundary. So if we have a very big data set on our training, so basically each of our words at the end will have will say in a decision boundary. The neural network at the end will learn how to map them. So basically, it's just the same nature of the image as long as they are vectorized. So I think they are applicable in the natural language processing as well.
Good. No, I think it's a good point. So let's keep that discussion going on, because that's interesting, because it might be something more creative that we can do there probably. But it's a good point, Maulik, that you brought it up on NLP, and I think there is some meat there anyways to investigate. Yeah, let's continue, Abhijit.
Right. So the untargeted version of FGSM is almost same, but here you just calculate your loss with respect to your current correct label, and you want to want to maximize the loss, and that's why you have a positive sign here. So these are almost same, just tweaks here and there. So this is exactly what we have seen in the last session, like adding a noise, and this noise was not random, this was exactly this, and then we'll classify it to some other class. And in this case, it was a target label, target class that was T that was given. So one thing that was rightly pointed out in this discussion was we are always moving epsilon, like we are always perturbing it to an epsilon. So even if the loss is very less with respect to some of the pixel, since we are like taking the signum, we are always kind of perturbing the image too much. So that is why we want a notion of distance and like how much the perturbation is, should be there. Is there any way in which we can add a penalty on the perturbation? So in that way, we'll have a more regulated attack, because an attack like this is not an attack because it is quite evident that someone has like perturbed the image. Attack should be like something like this, where you do slight perturbation and you get the attack. So I think this is the right time to introduce a notion of distance, and most probably we'll be working with the we'll be working with L infinity norm. I think most of us are kind of familiar with LP norms, which are defined in this fashion, and the most popular L norms that we work with is L2 and L infinity. But in our case, we will be more interested in working with this L infinity norm for various reasons, like because it's computationally easy. L2 norms are more complex, may introduce non-linearity, and that is why we'll mostly look at the L infinity norms. So essentially what we want, or what we are proposing here, is that let's keep all the definitions same, but we just have some parameter. We should need to have a check over the perturbation that we are doing, because we don't want to perturb image to a very large extent. And that is why we need a regulation on this perturbation. And this is where we get into the optimization problem. So essentially what we want to do is we want to minimize the eta, that is the perturbation, and we could choose norm of our choice. Most cases it is L infinity, or even L2 is favorable. Here, since the norm is in the objective function, I think we can easily use L2 form because it will be a convex problem. But if suppose the norm is coming in constraints, then it would be quite difficult to solve that problem.
Yeah, just to mention, it's a good point, Abhijit, that you brought out here, is anybody who does not have a background in optimization, you know, if when you're trying to solve an optimization problem and you're trying to minimize or maximize any function, if you have nonlinear functions other than quadratic, the life is very complex. It's very hard to solve non-convex because your functions are non-convex, and it's very hard to solve non-convex optimization problems because you get into the problem of getting stuck in local minimas, and or sometimes even the problem becomes ill-conditioned because how the problems are framed. So people try to approximate things in a way that, you know, the functions are either linear or worst case quadratic, and then it's still easy to solve sometimes. And this is when we are talking about continuous functions. If you move around non-continuous functions, then you deal with things like integer programming and all that stuff, which is again has its own domain. But keeping in mind, when you're looking at an optimization problem, when you look at this formulation of minimization and maximization given some constraints, always keep in mind that your objective function, it's best if you have something which is convex or linear, but if you have non-convex and highly non-linear functions, I can already tell you that your optimization problem is a very challenging problem to solve. Yeah, go ahead, Abhijit.
Right. And also, I think we assume here that our input is normalized, and our input plus the perturbation that we are adding belongs to this interval. And also for the targeted case, we have this kind of constraint here that the perturbation that we are doing to the image, and the model should classify that perturbed image to some target class T. And this is a problem here. It's not that difficult problem, but then it's a hard constraint. The hard constraint means that you have to satisfy the exact equality at every during optimization, which is not that easy. So there are traditional methods that convert this equality constraints into penalty terms, and you add this penalty term here to your objective function. So this is kind of part of like how you solve the convex optimization problems. But essentially the thing here is like when you have equality constraints, they are hard constraints and you have to exactly satisfy them. And it's not very easy to do that. There are like methods like active set methods, which perform very well with equality constraints. Or the other reason that you can do is you can have a relaxation of hard constraint. So in traditional optimization problems, you add some penalty terms and you penalize this constraint. Like whenever it moves away from equality, you add some penalty terms. Just like to give you an intuition, if you don't have idea about this, just like how you do the regularization in machine learning, like you penalize the complexity. So that's how you add the penalty. But here we'll be relaxing the constraint in a similar way. We won't be adding the penalty in exactly the same fashion like how we do in convex optimization problems. Instead, we'll define an objective function, and we'll define it like this. Like if the objective function, the new objective function that we define is less than equal to 0, then we will say that this model will classify it to target class T. And now we will be adding this objective function, this new objective function that we have proposed to our original objective function of minimizing this LP norm. And this is kind of our penalty term. So this leads to maybe introduction of a hyperparameter, which is a burden in training, but then it helps in many ways. Like you don't have to work with now the hard constraints, but then also you have to consider the fact that you are also sacrificing the accuracy here, because it might happen that sometimes the constraint may not be satisfied completely, and there might be some accuracy issues, but then it really helps you in relaxations. So essentially,
yeah, so there's a trade-off that you have to make based on ability to solve a problem easily versus the performance. And sometimes people would prefer ease of solving rather than accuracy, because just of the complexities involved in solving such hard constraint problems. And yeah, and that's very, very crucial in designing your problem. In fact, your objective functions and your constraints. Yeah.
right. Like for safety critical systems, this is not very favorable. But then when we talk about attacks, it has to be fast at the same time. So I think we need to be more fast here, and that's why we are adopting this kind of thing. And also one thing to point out here, that the vice versa is not true. This is like only one if condition. There can be scenarios where the objective function is greater than 0 and still we may satisfy this property, this constraint. So just to point out that this is only one way implication and not the other way around. It's not if and only if, it's just if. So now what are the examples that has been explored in the literature for this objective function? So some people have defined like this and some like this. So I think let's get to the graph and we'll be able to understand it more easily. So what we are doing here is that we are, in first case, we are taking the motivation from the cross entropy loss. And what essentially you are doing here is that the loss is negative of the log of the probability, and you are doing -1 here. And the motivation for this -1 here is that when you will get when you will get your model to point to the target class, when the probability of that target class is greater than 0.5. So when you see here, and also when this happens, like when the probability is greater than 0.5, you want this condition to work. And exactly this is what is happening here. When you see here, this is the 0.5 in the graph. And when the probability is greater than 0.5, then we know that our model will classify the input to the class T. And also we are satisfying our condition here. That is the objective function is negative here. So this is how we have defined our objective function in this case. And similarly, the other choice has the similar implications. Like when your probability is greater than 0.5, then these terms become negative, and then you get 0 here. And otherwise, you will have this kind of behavior here. So that is why, like these are the two prominent loss or objective functions that have been defined for relaxing the hard constraint. So this is how people have tried to deal with this hard constraint problem. But I think if we are taking a L2 norm here and we have a hard constraint here, like equality constraint, I think there are good active set. There are solvers based on active set method that are able to solve this problem correctly. But then again, we have to check we have to work it and see like how fast are these two methods. There is always a trade-off in this. So now we have dealt with the hard constraint problem, but there is again a problem here. So what if I don't want a L2 norm? When we take a L2 norm, the things become very easy, because when you have L2 thing, you have a quadratic function and it will be a convex, and then everything becomes very easy because you can formulate it and formulate it as a convex optimization problem, and then use normal gradient descent based methods, and there are a lot of things that are there. But what if we want L infinity norm? And I still can't, like, I can't still figure it out, like why are we so concerned about L infinity norm if we are having like L infinity here? If we were having the L infinity in constraints, then it would have been easier. Like we could argue that if the norm is coming in the constraint, then for obvious reasons, the L infinity norm will be much easier to solve than the L2 norm, because L2 norm will introduce the non-linearity. But what if I have it in the objective function? Like I can't figure it out, like why in the paper they have proposed L infinity norm. But like let's like accept the fact that we have L infinity norm, and let us see like how the gradient works on this norm and how are we going to optimize in this scenario. So we know now that for this objective function, we can easily find gradient with respect to this. And now we have to look at like how are we dealing with this, how are we going to deal with finding gradients for this term. So how the gradients are defined for the L infinity norm is that all the elements of that vector will be 0 except one, because in L infinity norm, what essentially you are doing is you're taking the maximum element from your vector. So in this scenario, and there is a mathematical proof. You can look on the internet for these proofs. But what intuitively you can see here is that suppose this is n1, n2, and n3. Essentially, L infinity will keep 1 and make rest of 0. So since there is only n1, because n1 is maximum here, you can see 0.5, and we are taking gradient with respect to n1, and that will be 1 and rest will be 0. And that is how we are taking gradient in case of L infinity now. And you will do the same gradient descent updates, a step length, and you will move against the direction of descent, because you want to minimize the perturbation. That is why you're moving. That is why you have a negative sign here. You are moving against the direction of descent. But the problem here is that you might have observed here that in each iteration, you are just working with one of the element or one of the direction. And if your vector is long, if it has maybe 1,000 dimensions or maybe more, then just to get a good update, you might have to do 1,000 iterations, because at each iteration only one of the direction is getting affected. So this is not the most efficient way. And other thing that will happen is that apart from like getting a slower training performance, that due to the objective function, like you can see here, like what is happening, that since all other terms are 0, what might happen that the second term, that there's no check that is happening on this term. So it might happen that the gradient of this term may add to these locations, because essentially when you are minimizing this, you will be finding gradient with respect to this and gradient with respect to this, and you will be subtracting it to the input. So so what might happen here is that, for this, it might not be that problematic, but for the zero locations, I know it's like a bit difficult to understand, but like what will happen that for this zero locations, the objective term may add some numbers, like maybe it adds some 0 point, and it may add it in like negative direction also, like minus 0.4. So this minus and minus may get plus, and like what might happen that there can be oscillations in that. So for example, maybe after when we take gradient over this term, we may get this update, and then after full optimization step, like when you are optimizing here, you are just looking at the gradient of this, but eventually you have to look at the gradient of this also. So after full optimization step, like after looking at the gradients of both of these two terms, what will happen that the objective function may increase the one of the two terms, and again then this oscillations can happen. I am finding it difficult to explain, but I think if you think about it,
Yeah, it's a very well nicely. So actually, you see in optimization, the gradient of independent terms is important, but also a cumulative ingredient of the full function, objective function that you have. And what he's saying is basically because you are looking at only the norms direction, it may be okay. It looks okay, but once you look at the cumulative gradient, it may change, because eventually the whole in an optimization, in an optimization problem, in a solution procedure, you basically, anybody who remembers gradient descent and those simple algorithms, what you do is you update every time, you update the direction in which you're moving it in at every step. And what might happen is you might just keep oscillating at the same spot, because the directions keep changing, just because although your netas is the slope is correct, but it gets modified as a cumulative of the full objective function. And I think that some intuition is, just the oscillatory nature of gradient descent algorithms that you already have based on the step sizes.
Right, and there is nothing that could check over the performance of the gradient of this objective term, and that is what is causing the problem here. So what have been proposed here is that a new method, like in some literatures they have explored this problem and found that what if we could replace this L infinity norm with this method, in which we introduce one more hyperparameter tau that could have a check over the etas. And there is a lot of hard work that goes on, but I still can't like figure it out why they have used L infinity norm. They could have easily used L2 norm and could have worked it out. But then just to like have an intuition, what is happening here is that so let's kind of look at this now, and let us suppose we have a perturbation like this, and now we have defined our L infinity norm like this for eta, and initially what we and we have introduced one more hyperparameter here, that is tau is equals to 1, and we will initialize it to 1 initially. And what we will do is that now if you look at this, what will happen that initially when the tau is 1, this thing will be negative for all the elements, because one thing is we are taking the normalized input, so that means our input will be within 0 and 1, and we are subtracting 1 from each of them. So essentially we'll be getting negative sign here. And then we are taking max with respect to 0. And then that is why initially our L of eta will be 0. And in each iteration, what you will do is that you will keep decreasing the eta. Now and you decrease it by some factor, like for our case we took 0.9, but it's a hyperparameter that you have to play with. So suppose you work with 0.9, you work with a factor of 0.9, and each iteration you decrease the eta, the tau, and you decrease it till you get your L of eta not equal to 0. So the motivation here is that you essentially want to approximate your L infinity now. So what is happening here is that if I keep decreasing the tau, after some tau, I will have some non-zero elements in my vector. And when this happens, when you take the gradient, because we have approximated it as a L infinity norm for eta. And now when we are taking gradient here, we see that not only one element is non-zero, but we can have multiple elements as non-zero. And this is how we can increase the efficiency of the update for the L infinity norm of eta. So this is how this is proposed. And there are methods like they say, like do some k iterations, keep the iteration until you get L of eta not equal to 0. If it's 0, then continue optimization with and reduce it tau by a factor of 0.9 at every iteration. And there can be a scenario when even if you keep decreasing tau, you might not get L of eta is equals to non-zero, but eventually you have to stop it sometimes. So this say like stop the entire optimization if tau is equals to this. And this whole process, like from the start, when we have defined the optimization problem, like minimizing eta, where we have constraint, hard constraint, and then all this that we have talked afterwards, like approximating the hard constraint, and then also approximating our L infinity norm. So this all is proposed by the Carlini and Wagner, and this essentially is called Carlini and Wagner attack. And this is how this works. So essentially what you have done here is that you have approximated your L infinity norm for eta. And if you see here, if my eta at some iteration satisfy this condition, that it is less than the highest value of the element in the vector, but greater than the second highest value of the element in that vector, then what will happen that only one of the vector will be non-zero. And again, it will approximate as the L infinity norm. And it will the gradient of the L infinity norm will approximate to the L of eta. So I think it's not difficult, but then if you give some time, and I think it is easy to understand like what is happening here. The basic thing that remains is this, and everything that happens or revolves around like how can we make some adjustments that will help us to solve this convex optimization problem easier. But if you have some good solvers that can deal with this directly, then there is no need to do this. But then it's always good to have some relaxations and look at like what are the trade-offs, like how fast you can do this, because essentially the attacks has to be fast. So this all things that we have discussed here, it essentially tries to speed up our optimization problem.
No, good job, Abhijit. Yeah, so I know this is actually a quite, he summarized this in a very nice way in a very short time, but I think it's a very involved, thing. Anybody, I think at least we got the basic idea of what the intuition behind doing this thing is, and this is an approximation to the LP norm. So, and you want to, and the reason people do approximations is to make your optimization problem easier to solve. And this attack is a very famous attack. The Carlini and Wagner attack. It's very commonly used nowadays, and it's turns out to be a reasonably good attack. And you see this notion of tau actually was introduced only to approximate the what we call it, your L-infinity norm. But I think it's a good starting point, and we'll continue. I think we are already out of time, so we'll continue in the next week, and I'm sure, I think Taif is going to take it up from here onwards in the next week. But I think this was a fantastic presentation, and I think if anybody is more interested, I think we should look into this paper in more detail and discuss it if anybody has more ideas that are coming up. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, if no more questions or comments, but let's thank Abhijit again for a fantastic presentation. Very well done, Abhijit, and very precise. I really appreciate your work here. It was very well done.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Professor.
Good. So let's meet again next week, and I will keep you guys posted on what we are doing for Friday. And we'll go on from there. Okay. And
Yeah.
I'm meeting on one-on-one anyway, so everybody knows when I'm meeting them. Any other comments? Abhijit, you were saying something?
Yeah. So like we have completed around 2 lectures of that course.
Right.
So probably there will be one more lecture on adversarial attack, in which we'll be preliminary discussing about the PGD attack, which is one of the most famous attacks for adversarial training. And maybe after that, Taif can take up the adversarial defense.
Sure. So maybe, so Abhijit, do you recommend that you want to go next again and finish off PGD, and then Taif comes in back for defense? Is that what you're recommending?
Yeah, I think anything works, even if someone wants to take up a PGD attack, because that is very short, like it won't take much time.
Then I think I can do it. That probably it will be nice for him to do it next week then. Okay, you can take a break.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone, and then let's see you guys next week.
Okay. Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night. Day.
Thank you.